I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings, Arnold.
There's always a pecking order. The little packers never mess with the big packers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
All right, welcome to the Bodybuilding Legends podcast, and I have one of my favorite guests, my friend Jerry Brainum, who used to work for Iron Man magazine, and he has a newsletter called Applied Metabolics. Is that right, Jerry? Applied Metabolics?
That's correct. It's at www.appliedmetabolics.com.
Okay.
Right.
So, Jerry, I thought we'd put you on the show because we're coming up on New Year's Day of 2019, and all the bodybuilding podcasts now are doing the year in review for 2018. So I thought, instead of, since we're doing bodybuilding legends and we're talking about the history, why not go back in time? And so I thought we could discuss 1968. We'll go 50 years backwards, and we'll talk about what happened then instead of 2018, which really doesn't apply to our show because we're talking more about the history.
Right. Sounds good to me. Well, 1968 has special meaning for me because that's when I first moved to California from New York.
Oh, really? Okay.
I arrived here August 21st, 1968. Still remember the day.
Wow.
And one of the first things I did is go right to Vince's gym. You remember Vince's gym?
Yeah.
That was the big, even before Gold's, that was the big bodybuilding gym back then. At that time, Larry Scott, first Mr. Olympia, Don Howard, a lot of champions, and of course Vince Garanda, who I luckily got along with. He was a little kind of funny kind of guy, but
hard to
I
get
got
along with
him. So and that's where I met Arnold at Vince's gym. So that has special significance.
And 1968 was also the year that Arnold came to the United States.
That's exactly right. In fact, I met Arnold. I met him only, about 2 weeks after he got to the United States. Wow. I met him at Vince's gym. And I remember one of the first things we talked about was his loss to Frank Zane, which I think you probably want to talk about.
Yeah.
Frank Zane, we could get into that. Well, he had just lost to Frank Zane at the IFBB Mr. Universe. I believe it was in Miami Beach.
Right.
And, of course, this was only, this was like 9 days after the show. I didn't know what anyone looked like. I knew what Arnold looked like. Yeah. Because I seen him in the magazines. He was a really big guy, a young guy that, what was he, like 21, 22 years old when I met him. Mm-hmm. So we could talk about that, but it's an interesting story, what he told me. It's very interesting.
So what was your impression of Arnold when you met him, Jerry?
The thing is about Arnold is that I watched Arnold evolve over the years. And people who knew him back in Europe told me that he was kind of the equivalent of an American person who kind of lives up in the hills, kind of backwards, not sophisticated. And that's more or less, I found that to be true. The original Arnold, remember, he spoke broken English. And, did I ever tell you the story about, when he first came to Vince's, what Vince said to him? Did I ever tell you that story?
Yeah, tell that story. I heard it before, but go ahead and tell it.
Well, what happened was this is how I met Arnold.
Okay.
Remember, I got along well with Vince. Vince was a funny guy. Either you hated him or you loved him. I loved him. I thought he was just a incredibly knowledgeable guy. To me, once you get to know him, he was hilariously funny. He really was. But anyway, I used to sit and talk to Vince after the workouts, and he said to me one day, he says, "Hey, Jerry, this guy Arnold Schwarzenegger is coming to." I said, "Who?" He said, "Some Europe." I said, wait a minute, Vince, you mean Arnold Schwarzenegger? He said, yeah, that's him. I said, Vince, that guy's a sensation in Europe. He's already won I think he's won 2 Mr. Universe contests. I said, he's like 21 years old and he's gigantic. He's tremendous.
Yeah.
He's coming to the gym. He says, yeah. So sure enough, Arnold shows up a couple of hours later and he walks right up to Vince and he says, I am Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mr. Universe. And so Vince looks at his face, goes slowly down his body, back up to his face, and he says, "You look like just a big fat fuck to me." and I looked at Arnold, and I hadn't actually spoken to Arnold at this point, but Arnold's jaw dropped. He was like in shock. Uh-huh. So I immediately went up to him and I introduced myself. I wasn't even writing back then, I just was a guy at the gym, what was I, 18 years old, so I said to him, listen, Arnold, first of all, let me tell you, Vince, I was out of range. Vince couldn't hear me say this. I said, I have seen you in the magazines. I think you're sensational. I said, you're only a little bit older than me, and look at you. You're twice my size. I said, you are a prodigy. I said, you could do anything in bodybuilding. I said, let me explain Vince. Vince has a little procedure. Anyone who first joins his gym, he insults them. And depending on their reaction, he likes them or he doesn't. In other words, if you don't react, if you let him insult you and kind of laugh it off, he likes you.
Yeah.
Now, I was told about him, so when he insulted me, just like he insulted you, he insulted me also, I laughed, and that's why we get along. So don't take it personal. He does this to everybody. It's just his personality.
Right.
So Arnold, he liked that. He calmed down, and he was okay, and this and that.
Yeah.
But the really interesting part of the story, Arnold and I became friends. I remember he was on a very low. Joe Weider had brought him over. He was giving him like just barely enough money to live on, and I remember the first car he leased him was a Volkswagen Beetle. I remember,
right.
And Arnold used to drive in the Beetle, and Arnold was a big guy. I was like what? I was maybe 190. I wasn't nearly as big as him. But when we sat in the front in that car, it was like being in a sardine can because we were like crunched in there,
Right.
But so we became good friends. Arnold, after the workout, there was a supermarket across the street from Vince's, and Arnold would actually, we'd walk over there. Arnold would actually buy my groceries.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, we got to be good friends. And one time I asked him, I said, Arnold, wasn't there a contest you competed in recently? He said, yeah, the Miss Universe. That's the first American show. I said, what happened? He says, I'll show you what happened. So it turns out that Weider had actually rented him an apartment only about 2 blocks away from Vince, right on Ventura Boulevard there in Studio City. So I walked over to Arnold's apartment, and as soon as I opened the door, the first thing I see is a guy running around the room wearing boxer shorts,
Uh-huh.
And like Arnold acted like he wasn't there. So I whispered to Arnold, I said, who is that guy? He says, that's Paul Graham. He says he's a wrestler. Good. He's a friend of mine. He says he goes under the name Lord Paul. Now, Paul Graham, now think about it. Later on, became the IFBB honcho of all of Australia. He became the head of the IFBB in Australia. This was the same Paul Graham. He never acknowledged me the whole time I was sitting in. He never said hello. Never tried to introduce him. He just walked around in the boxer shorts.
Unbelievable.
So Arnold sits me down and he says, let me show you the medallion that all the competitors had to wear at this show in Miami Beach where Frank Zane beat me. And so he hands me this kind of big medallion, and I look at it, and as clear as day, there's Frank Zane in the double arm. He didn't even try and disguise his face. It was Frank Zane on the medallion,
On the
right?
medallion, unbelievable.
He says, also this, and he hands me a program from the show, and on the cover of the program is Frank Zane. Again, he says, what does it look like to you? He says, of course it was fixed, he goes. So I'm much bigger than Frank Zane,
Right.
So Arnold, it looks pretty bad, I'll tell you. I mean, to have a competitor, be on the medallions that all the guys wearing on the program, I have to admit, it doesn't look good.
Right.
So, but what happened was, when the magazines came out about 2 months later, it took a little time back then. There was no internet. This is 1968 when the magazines did come out, and I saw the photos. I looked at Arnold. Arnold, sure enough, was much bigger than Zane, but he was very pasty. He had no tan,
right,
and he was very bulky. And Zane was tan and cut, and much smaller, but much more finished.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, well, Zane actually deserved to win. Now the interesting part of the story is that many, many years later, I mean, this is like, I think was Arnold, I think it might have been when he was the governor of California. My phone rings, and I hear a voice. He says, hello, Jerry, this is Arnold. And I said, oh, God. I said, I figured somebody's playing a joke on me, imitating Arnold. I said, okay, who is this? I said, I have to admit, you got his voice down really good. But who is this? He says, no, this is really Arnold. He says, I got your number from John Balick, He wanted to ask me, he was going to give a speech and he wanted to talk about nutrition, and he wanted to know when protein powders were first introduced. So we chatted a little bit, I remember how I said, listen, I said, I'm going to test you, I said. I said, only the real Arnold would know this. I said, when Arnold mixed his protein drinks, he would add an unusual ingredient to it. Only Arnold would know this. What did he add? He says, oh, you're talking about the schnapps. It really is you, Arnold. Arnold used to add a little bit of whiskey to it.
Oh, really?
He thought that would cause because he knew that alcohol is absorbed very rapidly.
Yeah.
So he thought the alcohol would pull the protein in his body faster. That was early form of bro science.
Right.
But but looking at Arnold, what are you going to argue with the guy?
Right. It worked.
It worked. So I said to him, Arnold, I said, do you remember that conversation we had many years ago where you told me that you should have beaten Frank Zane and you showed me the pro? And he says, no, the truth of the matter is Frank Zane was the better man that night and he deserved to win.
Wow.
And that's big of you to say that, Arnold. I mean, he says, oh, it was the truth. Yeah. He said, I came over a little raw. It was a different level of competition here. You had to be harder, and I made some changes, and you know the rest. He goes, I said, that was that story,
Yeah, that's great that you got to meet him when he first came over, and you became good friends with him and stuff. That was really cool.
Oh yeah, he was basically because of his lack of he spoke broken English.
Yeah.
But because he didn't speak let's say English fluently, he would often he'd take things wrong. He thought people would be laughing at him when they weren't. And
yeah.
It was a completely different Arnold in the early days, and I watched him evolve. And without realizing it, Arnold actually used a psychological technique they call modeling. What he did was make believe he was something that he wasn't. In other words, he started to act very confident and self-assured. And this is what you see in some of those like pumping iron, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, and he actually took on the persona he was playing. In other words, he became the person he was trying to be. In other words, he actually became the super confident. I saw it right in front of me because, I say, Arnold, who was here in the first 2 years in the United States, was a completely different guy than you see today. Completely different.
Wow.
I mean, it's not that he wasn't friendly or funny or anything like that. He just wasn't as sure as himself. Let's put it that way.
Wow, that's surprising to hear because when you think of Arnold, you always think of him as someone very confident and very sure of himself.
No, it took him a couple of years to develop that, but
Wow.
He did a great job. Very few people that match his self-confidence and self-belief. That's
Absolutely.
why I think that's a large key to his success.
Yeah. He's always been one of the most amazing success stories to me, when I look at his life and how he's been able to accomplish stuff and how he's learned things, like you said, how he learned to get better, as he went along.
Well, Arnold did also a smart thing, is he was open to learning from people that knew more than him. In other words, he wasn't arrogant. In other words, somebody, like, for example, when he started making enough money to invest, he had some friends that knew a lot about real estate, and he kind of listened to them. And they instructed him how to, for example, purchase apartment buildings and this and that. Mm-hmm. And he kind of picked up on it. And of course, by the time he went into acting, he was also already a multimillionaire from his real estate holdings.
Yeah.
He used to talk to Joe Weider about buying art because Joe was into buying art, and Arnold listened to that. And then somebody said you should go to business school, so he did this kind of correspondence course. Although it says in his biography, I get a laugh at it, that he got a business degree from the University of Wisconsin. In fact, he never set foot on the campus. He was in correspondence school.
Okay.
Where he did get a business degree. So it's real. It's a real school, but it was kind of a correspondent rather than actually attending classes.
Yeah.
But he did attend classes at Santa Monica College, I remember, where he learned a lot of English, and he became very fluent in English. And so Arnold that's a good quality he has, where he has an open mind, he's willing to learn, and he uses what he learns to his advantage. People should take a lesson from that.
Yeah.
That's a big key to his success.
Yeah.
And also, he was impossible to discourage. I mean, once he set a goal, nothing on earth would stop him from attaining it. Mm-hmm. I remember having a conversation with the guy where he mentioned that, actually, it was right around the same time. It was 1968. We were walking down Ventura Boulevard after work at Vince's. And Arnold said to me, he said, Jerry, he says, how when people talk about muscles, they say things like muscles like Steve Reeves. Of course, Steve Reeves he was the big superstar at the time from the Hercules movies, the most famous bodybuilder.
Right.
He says, one day, mark my words, one day the expression will be muscles like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Which became true, right?
Yeah, sure.
But his next sentence really kind of threw me. He says, my plans include winning the Miss Universe 6 times, then winning the Mr. Olympia at least 6 times, and after my bodybuilding is over, I'm going to go into movies. This is 1968.
Yeah.
And I'm going to become a big star just like Steve Reeves. That's when I said the following to him. I said, Arnold, and I put my hand on his shoulder. I said, Arnold, I said, I consider you a friend, so please don't take this wrong. I said, but the way the acting industry here is, the studio system, I said, a big guy like you with your accent, I said, I don't think you could ever become a movie star. I said, you could be like, leg breakers in the background.
Right.
You could play guys that don't have any lines.
Right.
I said, I don't really, I wouldn't really. He says, that's okay, we'll see. I never, honestly, I didn't really, could not have foreseen that he'd become this like huge superstar.
Right.
He did it. And I used that anecdote to show that, this guy could not be discouraged.
Yeah.
Because if it was reversed and somebody said this to me, I'd probably think about it. I'd say, gee, maybe I'd be wasting my time, and I would think about it. But Arnold, his mindset, I've never met a guy, let me put it this way, in my whole life who, once he set a goal, could not be deterred. You could throw anything at him, So, I remember when I was thinking of going to medical school, I read a bunch of things and people told me how hard it was to get in and this and that, and it discouraged me and I gave it up. You see, Arnold would have said, "Screw that! I'm going to try it anyway."
Yeah.
So he had that over me. I was unfortunately influenced, not so much today, but back then when I was younger, I was. But even as a young man, nothing could deter Arnold. Nothing. The guy was incredible in that sense.
Wow.
Never anybody like that.
Speaking of Mr. Olympia, Sergio Oliva won in 1968. That was his second Mr. Olympia contest that he won. Were you at that show? Because I know you went to some of those other shows at the Brooklyn Academy of Music in the 1960s.
I wasn't at that show, but I can tell you a story about that.
Okay.
When Sergio won that second contest, I remember I just gotten I had a subscription to Iron Man magazine. And they had just gotten the issue that had the report of that 68 Olympia in there. Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, in that Olympia, Sergio was unopposed.
Right.
Nobody even wanted to compete against him, right? So I remember, they had pictures of Sergio, and one picture was Sergio in a pose like this, with his arms out like that, And I showed it to Arnold. I remember Arnold was wearing that big tank top he used to wear. And I showed it to Arnold. I could still remember his words. He's looking at the pictures of Sergio. He says, he's incredible. He says, no one can ever beat him. That was his exact words.
Wow.
It's funny what you think would happen in the ensuing years.
Yeah.
Because if I remember correctly, in 1969, didn't he actually beat Arnold? Or was that was 69?
Yeah. Sergio beat Arnold in 69, and then Arnold beat him in 1970. So that was the next year, yeah.
So in other words, Sergio actually did beat Arnold a year later, and then Arnold, of course, he started. That's when he started to really refine his physique.
Right. And
of course, 1970, after that, I think he also beat him in 72. Also.
Yeah.
Sergio wasn't allowed to compete in 71, I think, because of some sort of political thing with the IFBB.
Right.
Because Sergio he had competed in Sergio Brace Federation there in Europe or something like that.
No, it was the NABBA Universe against Bill Pearl. Remember when Bill Pearl beat him?
You're right.
Yeah.
The NABBA Universe, right.
Yeah.
So he skipped 71, and of course in 72, that was the one show in Germany.
Yeah, that's in Germany.
State, which remains very controversial. I wasn't at that one either, but I remember talking. I ran into a couple of the guys that competed about about a week after the show. I remember running into Frank Zane and asking him. And he said that he told me Sergio should have won. Sergio better shape than Arnold. And I asked about 3 other guys who I can't even remember who were also in the show or who were there. They also repeated the same thing. Sergio should have won.
Wow.
There's only one bodybuilder I didn't ask Arnold, but only one bodybuilder who I spoke to about it said that Arnold should have won. That was Franco Colombo.
Yeah, of course. His buddy.
He said, Arnold's the best, he goes. Sure enough, again, when the photos came out, honestly, to this day, it's not that Arnold looked bad, but Sergio was at his all-time
best, right?
Absolutely phenomenal that year. I still think that Sergio, I don't know if Arnold would admit that today. You know, he gave credit to Frank Zane, but I don't know if he, I don't think he'd give credit to Sergio for being better that year, but I believe he was. I think most people agree.
In 68, you think Sergio was still better than Arnold, right?
Oh, yeah. Sergio was still harder.
Yeah.
They talk about genetics in bodybuilding, John. You always hear this thing about you have to have good genetics to get to the elite level.
Right.
And, if you look at pure genetics, I think that Sergio was more genetically gifted than Arnold.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's a number of reasons because, for one thing, I mean, I'm good friends with Sergio Oliva Jr. He's told me a lot of things about his father and all that. And there's already things I knew. Sergio basically was a kind of on-the-cuff guy. I mean, he didn't diet. He did everything wrong. I mean, he did all these short movements.
Yeah.
He overtrained, I mean, he did everything wrong. Yet he built that physique, that tiny, tiny waist. I remember when I saw him in person the first time, I couldn't believe how his waist to shoulder taper.
Yeah.
You got to see him in person to believe it. Even in the photos, it doesn't really display what he showed. His waist looked tiny.
Yeah.
The only guy who I ever saw who had a really smaller waist than Sergio was a guy named Brian Buchanan. You might remember who won the Universe. This Brian Buchanan had the smallest waist of any normal size man or bodybuilder I've ever met. I mean, he told me he had a 27-inch waist, and if you see him, his waist was like tiny. Yeah. And I said to him once in the gym, I said, Brian, he used to walk around, with a lifting belt that. I mean, it made his waist so small. I mean, I said, Brian, do you realize that you have a smaller waist than all the women in the gym? I said, that's genetic, right? He says, no, not really. I said, what do you mean? He says, both my parents were short and fat. That's what Brian Buchanan.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Now, Brian Buchanan was kind of a jokester. He liked to, joke around. I don't know whether he was kidding me or not. I find it hard to believe that body came from two short, fat parents.
Right. Doesn't make sense.
Could be true, but again, he loved to joke, Brian Buchanan.
Right.
And he used to say to me stuff like when I'd show up, and he knew me pretty well. I mean, I did a couple of articles on him. I remember when I showed up at the '88, I think it was the '88 Olympia. Is that the one that was in L.A.?
Yeah.
I remember I showed up, and they had the guys just standing around, and Brian Buchanan said to me, remember, he knew me. And this is an example of his humor. He says, Jerry, do you actually lift weights? So I had a quick comeback. I said, do you? We both laughed. We both laughed.
Right.
He said this in front of a bunch of people like he thought I would get all embarrassed and stuff like that. Yeah. That stuff doesn't bother me. You can't get to me by saying that stuff. I get it all the time. People will say to me, hey, did you used to lift weights?
Right.
And I used to get annoyed about it like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I said, I look that bad when people don't even look. Now, my typical answer is, yeah, I lifted weights about 60, 70 years ago. And I laugh.
Right.
It always leads to people scratching their head. Well, you just look that old.
So when you saw Sergio in 66, when he was competing against Larry Scott, he was much better in 68, right? He was much bigger.
Much better.
Yeah.
He was bigger. He was like 30, 40, well, not 40, but it looked like he was like 20, 30% bigger.
Yeah.
And he was also much harder.
Yeah.
Because when he competed against Scott, he was more or less kind of fresh off being an Olympic weightlifter. He had only had 2 years of bodybuilding, straight bodybuilding training at the time.
Yeah.
So he was nowhere near his potential, which started to come out like you say around maybe 68, 69. That's when he peaked, I believe, in 72. That's when you had the greatest Sergio of all.
Right.
And the funny thing is, I told this to Sergio Oliva Jr. when I first met him. I didn't like Sergio Oliva because I tried to talk to him on a number of occasions, and he was always very nasty to me. You know, he was, I don't think it was a personal thing, but he knew that I worked for Joe Weider, and he didn't like Joe Weider, so he kind of took it down on me. And you know, in retrospect, you know, today I wouldn't take it as personal as I did back then. But I told, you know, and you know, I mean, but I still give the guy credit. As I told Sergio Jr., I said, you know, I didn't have a good opinion of your father because I met him 3 times and all 3 times were bad. But I said, you know, as far as a bodybuilder, he is without question one of the most genetically greatest bodybuilders of all time. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
You know, so and Sergio Jr. said, yeah, he could be a real bastard. And I told Sergio Jr. It's a funny story. I told Sergio Jr. the time that I first met Sergio, which was at that Mr. Olympia. I came up to him backstage at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and I asked him for an autograph. I was a kid. I was, I forget, 16 years old, something like that. And I asked him for an autograph, and I remember he was wearing this bloody butcher's robe, had blood all over it.
Right.
You know? He was pumping up, you know, and I said, I called him Mr. Oliva. I said, Mr. Oliva, can I have an autograph? I had this little pad, you know, with a pen. Yeah. And he says, he looked at me and he says, get the fuck out of my face. And, you know, I was a Brooklyn kid, kind of a, you know, when you go in Brooklyn, you're ready to get in a fight in 2 seconds.
Right, right.
So I looked at him and I was about to respond. I was going to, you know, in kind, but I looked at this guy. I looked at all the blood on the robe. I looked at his face and he had scars on his face. And he just looked like a really rough guy. He had hair back then, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I said, nah, I'm not going to say anything. I just turned and walked away. And I told that story to Sergio Jr. So now we have a kind of standing joke. Every time I come into Gold's Gym, if Sergio Jr. is there, like at the other end of the gym, he'll yell he'll yell across the gym at me, hey, Jerry. I said, what, Sergio? He said, get the fuck out of my face. Funny story.
Yeah, that's great.
Honestly, I mean, I know you probably have spoken to Sergio, John, and you know, a lot of people have told me that, you know, you know, if you get him at the right time, he was a good person. He wasn't a bad guy. Right. So, you know, I'm not holding a grudge after all these years. I think it was more a case of me being associated with Joe Weider. Yeah, when I held that against you. And you know, he just didn't like Joe. Yeah. You know, for a number of reasons, and he took it out on me. So I'm not going to take it personal. I have nothing against him. I'm sorry he died, you know, and again, to me, far and away, maybe even the most genetically gifted bodybuilder of all time was Sergio. And I say that because he didn't do anything right, and he still looked like that. Yeah. I said to Sergio Jr., I said, you know, if most people use your father's nutritional training practices, they would have no physique at all. And look at him. Right. Look at what he did. I know. The guy's a phenomenon. He was just a genetic freak.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, you know.
Hey, talking about the amateurs in '68, Jim Haislop was the winner of the Mr. America, and he beat out Boyer Coe. Do you remember Jim Haislop?
I sure do. I remember him. In fact, when I first saw Jim Haislop, I wasn't at that contest, but because I hadn't started working for the magazines yet. But when I saw the photos of Jim Haislop, the first impression I got was this guy has like Steve Reeves structure.
Yeah, exactly.
He had broad shoulders, good delts, good calf delts, small waist. I mean, he looked like he was about maybe 5'11", you know, pretty tall. Yeah. And he had beautiful sweeping thighs. Yeah. Calves. And you know, the guy had everything. And I said, geez, I mean, how do you beat a guy with a structure like that? But my friend Richard Baldwin, I think you've spoken to Richard, yes. Mm-hmm. He actually either competed against him or saw him in person. I had never seen Jim. And I said, what's the deal with this guy, Jim Haislop, Richard? He said he had a great structure, but he was never cut. He was hard. He was always, I mean, he didn't have any fat on his waist or anything like that, but he never was ripped, ever. You know, that was his problem. That's why he probably couldn't have really gone all the way as a pro. And I think he, if I remember correctly, I think it was 68. He won it in 68. Was it 68 when he won the AAU America, Jim Haislop?
Over Boyer Coe, yeah.
Didn't he go to London, the NABBA University, and he didn't win?
Yeah, Dennis Tinerino won.
Dennis Tinerino beat him, and there's your answer. That underscores what you said. Dennis is always a very close old friend of mine. Dennis was always cut. That was his forte. Yeah. I mean, he had great abs. I mean, I used to watch Dennis just, we'd be talking. He'd suddenly flop on the floor and do like 300 crunch sit-ups. I mean, the guy was always working his abs. I mean,
right.
he was ripped. I mean, Dennis's forte was, of course, he won the Mr. America, Mr. Universe a couple of times.
Right.
I mean, even though Haislop had a much better structure than Dennis, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But Dennis's hardness, and so the London judges, the NABBA judges saw it, gave it to Dennis.
Yeah.
Because he's more finished physique. It's the same reason why Chet Yorton beat Arnold in the 66?
66, yeah, NABBA Universe.
Again, Arnold was you look at the photos, Arnold basically dwarfed Chet.
Yeah.
But Chet was far more finished. And Arnold's calves were very weak at that show, whereas Chet had, one of his features, he had good calves.
Yeah, yeah.
So, he beat Arnold. That's one of the few guys. Who was it? I think it was Chet Yorton, Frank Zane. I think it was one other person who beat Arnold.
Sergio.
Yeah, that's it. Those are the only 3 people that Arnold ever lost to.
Yeah,
And each time, by the way, it was fully merited. In other words, Arnold's not ripped off. He deserved to lose those 3 guys.
Right.
So that's my opinion, anyway.
Yeah. So if we look at 1968 as a whole, what do you think the biggest story of the year was? Was it Arnold probably coming to America, right?
I would say Arnold coming to America, yeah, because that was the beginning of this tremendous bodybuilding, acting, political career. I mean, real estate investing. I mean, when he gives those speeches today, he always talks about how he came here with nothing but a suitcase.
Yeah.
And you know what? I got it, John. I was there. I witnessed. He's not lying.
Yeah.
He had literally nothing. The man had nothing. I mean, he came here. Weeder brought him over. Weeder, like I said, rented him that apartment, gave him leased him the Volkswagen Beetle. I mean, he had everything he did. He just built it up on himself. And you got to give the man credit. I mean,
absolutely.
So that was the big story that year. And also, I think a secondary story would be no, that was in '60. I was going to say Don Howarth winning the America, but in '68 it was John DeCola, if I remember right. Didn't he win the IFBB America?
Yeah, I think you're right because. No, that might have been '69. Was it Zane that won the America that year? And then Zane won the Universe.
Oh, you're right. '67 was Don Howarth, '68 was Zane, and '69 was DeCola. That's right.
Right. Okay.
I saw John DeCola win a contest. I didn't see him win that IFB America. Maybe I don't know if I might have been there. I don't remember that one, but I did see him win a contest way back in I think it was '64. Believe it or not. I think I saw him compete at a show in New York, and I tremendously admired his physique. I mean, because DeCola, who he's still alive as far as I know.
Oh yeah, okay.
And he's a trainer, and from what I understand, he's in pretty good shape. But thank God the guy's still alive, But I mean, the thing is, I remember him having a head-to-toe body. See, I've always admired them. I judged early contests. I actually. Even shortly after I stopped competing myself, I was a judge at some not major shows, but shows. And I always, my philosophy as a judge was always judge head to toe.
Yeah.
I wouldn't give the contest the overall award to the guy with the biggest arms or the biggest delt. He had to have everything. Everything had to be. Not only did he have all the muscles, the calves, hamstrings, lower back, upper back definition, but it had to be in balance. It had to be symmetrical.
Right.
That to me. The man that actually met that criteria the closest. Let's face it, nobody's perfect.
Right.
Rarely do you see it. I mean, Arnold had flaws, Sergio had flaws. Everybody does, every human being. That's the nature of man. But the man that came closest to that judging criteria, that's the one I would award. And I actually also judged early female body. They asked me to judge early female. And I remember the first thing I did, I said to myself, I am not going to vote for the prettiest woman or the sexiest woman, because you know what? This is a bodybuilding show. I'm going to treat these women just like athletes, like bodybuilders. I don't care if the woman is dog ugly. If she has the best body, I'm going to vote for her. And I remember at one show, I voted for this woman that was really muscular. I mean, I don't know whether she was taking anything or not, drugs, but I mean, she just overshadowed all the other women. I mean, this is early female bodybuilding.
Right.
And she wasn't as big as the women got later, but she still was she looked, let's say, much more athletic and muscular than the other women. Remember, in those days, they kind of look like the bikini girls do today. Just in shape and no real muscle definition. Right. This woman had muscle definition, so I voted her first. But she was very unattractive, And I remember one of the other judges said, he said to me, "Jerry, how can you vote for that dog? My God." I said, what are you talking about? This is a bodybuilding show. Forget her face.
Right.
I said, women should never be judged on their physical appearance. I said, I'm sorry, but honestly, between me and you, when I view these current contests, like the bikini and some of the fitness girls, I do think that they are judged on their facial looks.
Yeah,
I think because it's not that ugly girls don't win, but if it's close between two women, let me put it this way: the woman that's more attractive will win. That's the way it's judged. That's what I see.
Yeah,
whether judges are consciously doing this or not, I don't know. The only way you would, in other words, what I'm saying is if you had an all-female judging panel, I think a lot of the results would be different because the female judges aren't going to judge on a woman's attractiveness. They're going to judge strictly on the criteria to win, whatever it is, whether it's the fitness or the bikini girl. They don't care what the woman looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I think, but they'll never do that, of course.
Right. Well, Jerry, I want to thank you for joining us. You spent a lot of time talking about the old days, so I appreciate it. And it's always great to hear your stories, and it's great to talk to you again. And I want to wish you a Happy New Year for 2019.
Absolutely. I hope you have a great and healthy New Year yourself, too. And keep up this great work. I always look forward to your videos about the great bodybuilders of the past. And to me, it is literally a stroll down memory lane.
Exactly.
I sit there. If you saw me watching, I got this big smile on my face the whole time. It's great.
That's great to hear.
Keep up the great work.
All right, I will. All right, buddy. All right, thanks again, Jerry. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Take care, John. Bye-bye.
All right, Jerry. Thank you. Bodybuilding Heroes and Legends Volume 1 by John Hansen is the book that celebrates the golden age of bodybuilding. This was the era in which legends such as Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sergio Oliva, Frank Zane, Robbie Robinson, Cal Scalak, and Mike Menser battled it out on stage for the biggest titles in bodybuilding. Read about some of the most exciting competitions that took place in the 1970s, including the Oliva-Schwarzenegger battles, Zane's first Olympia victory, and Scalak's controversial Mr. Olympia appearance, and much more. Filled with inspiring images of some of the greatest bodybuilders in the history of the sport, Bodybuilding Heroes and Legends Volume 1 is now available on Amazon.com or email John directly at naturalolympia@gmail.com.